I hope everybody had an enjoyable break. And welcome back. I'm really thrilled to introduce our next panel, which will be looking at transparency and AI. We'll be joined by a panel of experts, one in the room, three online, who will be exploring the centrality and really the significance, meaning of transparency and trust to the responsible use of data collected through AI and machine learning by governments, businesses, advertisers, and other stakeholder groups. Panelists will also, well, after reflecting on this, they'll also consider some of the dangers of the misuse of AI in this context and the impact that this may have on public trust in AI and other technologies. Our panel chair is chair of the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee and Conservative MP for Basildon, MP Stephen Metcalfe. He's also the chair of the APPG on AI. Virtually, we'll be joined by Dr. Evert Hastijk, an expert in AI and a senior forensic manager at Deloitte, Dr. Bridget Boakier, the AI lead at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, and Dr. Raman Chowdhury, Director of Machine Learning, Ethics, Transparency and Accountability at Twitter. With that, I would like to kick off this discussion. I'll hand it over to Stephen.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As you've heard, my name is Stephen Metcalfe. I'm Member of Parliament for South Basildon and East Thurrock, but more pertinently, I am the co-chair of the all-party group on AI, a group that myself and my colleague, Lord Tim Clement Jones, started back in 2016. And Tim has gone on to actually chair a select committee in the Lords who did a report on the importance and the use of AI. And the reason we started this group back in 2016 was there was an awful lot of hype flying around Parliament and the media generally about the role of AI in all its various guises. But there didn't seem to be any sort of definitive definition of what AI was and what it wasn't. And so we'd set up the group to try and bring people together, experts, take evidence from them, and try and work out where the potential opportunities lay, but also where some of the threats were. And we've been doing that now for 6 years. And one of the things that comes up time and time again is the fact that everything is underpinned by data, and that data is the fuel, if you like, for the fourth industrial revolution. And so, as I say, we come back to this issue around data. We come back to the issue of trust and of transparency and of regulation, and which is why when I was invited to chair this panel, I was very keen to do so. We know that our data is being collected, or we should know. But do enough people know when it is being collected? Do enough people know how it's collected and why it's collected and what it's used for? We know that the misuse of data can lead to unintended bias, or even, dare I say, intended bias. And so it is vitally important that we have collectively, not just those who have taken interest in this space, but actually as the public, the wider public, have a better understanding of what we mean when we say data, how it's collected and what it is used for. And to help explore that, we have, as we've heard, a panel of experts who two of whom have joined us at the moment. I think the third will be joining us as and when they can get their connection up and running. But what I'm going to do is invite each of them to make some opening remarks, 2 or 3 minutes, and introduce themselves and lay out where they think the issues are in this topic. And then what we'll do is try and facilitate some sort of conversation about data and its use and its transparency and the role it plays in fueling AI. So I'm going to go first to, let me just check my list, to Bridget. Bridget, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Perhaps if we could have 2 or 3 minutes from you about how you come to this, and then we'll hand over to Everett.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Sorry, I hear Okay, all good. Hello, everyone. It is an honor to speak on this panel. My name is Bridget Bowachi, as has been shared, and I am the AI Policy Lead at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Some may not be familiar with the work, so I'll spend just a minute talking about what we do and why we think it's important. So we are an independent, not-for-profit organization, and we do two main things: public policy, where we develop practical, radical solutions to the biggest challenges facing leaders. And a big portion of that is the work that we do in tech and public policy. And then we do government advisory, where at government's request and at their invitation, we help to deliver public sector reform. So the work that we do in the AI policy work is really to look at the global landscape on AI policy and to provide the thinking on what will it take for us to adopt AI responsibly across the entire world, not only in sort of developed countries, but in emerging markets as well. In terms of this conversation, we come to it from the perspective that AI is an enabler, as has been shared in the introductory remarks, that drives many aspects of our lives today. And we believe that there's a tremendous opportunity for governments in particular to harness the technology to deliver for their citizens. But the important aspect of it is that it's delivered responsibly. And that's where this question of transparency and, as we just mentioned, trust comes in. So I'm looking forward to this discussion to help perhaps illuminate some of what we're seeing in the global context on some of these government activities or government initiatives to address the issue of trust in AI, what the data sort of shows us in terms of where citizens are at this moment and what it will take for us to really build the AI ecosystem that helps us to deliver for everyone and not just for a select few. So I'll stop here and turn it over to Everett.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Bridget. Everett.
Yes, I'm very, very pleased to be here. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Evert Haasdijk. So I don't expect anybody outside the Netherlands to be able to pronounce that properly. But I used to be an assistant professor here at the VU University here in Amsterdam in AI. And now I'm a senior manager in Deloitte's forensic practice, where we apply AI a lot to combat financial crime, and that's it's a very relevant, a very interesting area to deploy AI and to deploy data-driven decisioning in a broader sense. I don't want to get into the discussion of what intelligence exactly is, but it's also one that's risky, in the sense that if there are biases, these can be very, or the effect of biased decisions can be enormous. So with that in mind, I'm doing many projects also with government agencies here in the Netherlands to ensure that AI is applied responsibly, that these data-driven decisions are based on the appropriate data, that especially, let's say, hidden biases can be analyzed. And there are, so I'm at heart, I'm a techie, so I'm always very, very interested in all the technological solutions. But I think that an important issue here that is very often overlooked is that the decision to automate a decision or to automate some risk indicator of fraud, which would be my field, that decision is very often taken very lightly and not very transparently. So that's transparency at a different level. And I would advocate that senior management take their responsibility in these kinds of in all kinds of applications of AI, and that they take the decision whether or not to automate certain decisions and to assess the impact of any errors that will be made, because errors will be made, rather than sort of leave that to the data scientist who's developing a model and in the course of developing that model, makes a couple of choices that he or she may not be aware of the impact of some decisions. And I really think that this discussion at this level with responsible management is key to responsible application of AI. And I'd like to leave it at that for now.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you both for your introductions. Perhaps I could start off with, I mean, we talk about data transparency, but we haven't really got a definition for that. Or maybe we have, and I just don't know it. So when we talk about data transparency, what do we actually mean? Either of you want to, Bridget, or?
Well, it's a very interesting, very interesting question, really. I think there's a bit of an echo. Is that just me? I think there are various levels at which you can consider transparency. So one is, which I alluded to just now, transparency of actually collecting data or using data to base a decision on, whether or not and to automate those decisions. Another discussion is about, okay, so if you're automating decisions, how do you make sure that you can explain the basis for your decision? So which bits of data drove a particular decision one way or the other, or what we call ex ante, which kinds of data are used in decisions over multiple, overall, so not for particular cases, individual cases. I realize that I'm not giving a definition, but there are at least these multiple aspects of transparency that are often intermingled in the discussion. I think it's useful to have a look at them separately and to realize that they are not one and the same. Okay, Bridget, do you have a view on that? Do you concur?
Yes, I was not vigorously. Sorry, there's an echo back again. You might have to mute.
It might be my microphone. Do I need my microphone on when? Yes. Okay. So I'll turn it off, and then hopefully the echo will go.
Sorry about that. So certainly agree with the points that Dr. Ever has made. On our side, we look at it as sort of a multiple of factors in terms of data and transparency and the questions that need to be asked to ensure that citizens are well aware of why their data is being collected, what variables are being factored into that decision-making process. But also on the, as Everett said, on the technology side, what, let's say in this case, using the term briefly, what algorithms are being used and how is it being trained and tested. So these are all, I think, factors that need to be considered within the transparency sort of paradigm that makes it a bit more nuanced conversation than what we can give a simple definition to.
Okay. I mean, I think I accept that it is difficult to define it, but we do want to know, surely, when our data is being collected, what is being collected and how it is going to be used. Do you think we know enough about that? That when we blindly click through terms and conditions when we download apps or we go onto a website and give away huge amounts of data. How do we improve the knowledge of what's being collected? And should it be a push or a pull model, do you think?
That's a really tricky one, to be honest. I don't know. As you say, we're all blindly clicking away all these warnings of cookies and whatnot whenever we're searching for something. So I think the push model is not working particularly well, I don't think. Are we aware? There's an enormous amount of data, as you say, is being gathered as we probably even as we're, or maybe even as we're discussing this right now. So incredible amounts of data are being collected, and to be honest, I don't think that we do know enough of what is being collected and for what purposes it's being collected. And also, I think, given the enormous amount and the enormous number of parties that are collecting data, I just said push model is not working very well, but the pull model, I mean, you would spend significant amounts of time trying to figure out what everybody is collecting. So I really think that it's a catch-22 there. So in terms of what, how to figure out what's being collected exactly.
Okay, Bridget, do you have a?
Yeah, I can come in here in terms of the question of if we do know enough. I agree that we certainly don't know enough. And some of the research we've conducted at the Institute sort of points to this. We conducted a survey with YouGov last year. And we see that particularly in the UK, there's generally sort of a low acceptance of big tech and national government agencies collecting information or collecting data. Folks just simply don't trust those institutions with the handling of personal data. And you know, as I think we would all agree with, you need a trustworthy innovation ecosystem to have AI sort of deliver and be used and bring about the benefits that we would want. In terms of what we think would work in building or ensuring that people are more aware of how their data is being used, there's a bit that lies on, let's say, the business or the organizational side. But looking at the whole governance ecosystem, another thing that we've been investigating is this idea of an assurance ecosystem, whereby, you know, we don't put the onus entirely on citizens or on users, but we look for ways to build a model that ensures that the folks who are using or collecting the data are actually delivering on the objectives or on the frameworks and standards that are being developed in terms of how the data can and should be used. And we think there's an opportunity there in terms of what that can do for trust in the ecosystem. But that takes a bit of work. And I think across the world, countries are trying to figure out how to build this assurance ecosystem to ensure that not only are standards and rules being designed for how companies and governments collect data, but to ensure that they're actually being used in the ways in which people say they are going to use them as well.
So I think I agree with you, and I'm sure Dr. Eva agrees as well. But we've been now developing AI, as I said, I started my group 6 years ago. It's out there, it's being used, and yet we're still talking about standards. Do we need to accelerate this? And if we do need to accelerate that, how do we do it?
Bridget, do you want to say something about this?
Yeah, these are very good questions. I think in terms of standards and where we stand on this, there's a bit that we've seen in terms of the need to have it be multi-stakeholder, to have it really have the credibility and the sort of uptake that it needs and requires to be useful in the ecosystem, right? So I think in the UK, the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation is sort of in the process of or has already put in place an AI standards hub where it's bringing together a number of stakeholders to deliver on this multi-stakeholder approach to developing standards. I think that's what makes developing standards difficult, is because you want, you know, all of the right parties in the room. You want every voice to be heard to ensure that it's really reflective of the larger ecosystem, as opposed to sort of centralized and coming from just a small group of people or a small group of companies. So in that sense, we know that the process is long. It takes a while. In terms of what, you know, we can do, when I think about the spectrum of countries that we work with, we have countries who have the resources to develop, let's say, a standards hub. And then on the other side, we don't have countries, we have countries who can't do that because of the resource constraints that they have. And in that sense, how do we ensure that governments are considering standards and are and are putting in place the right frameworks to ensure that AI is adopted transparently and responsibly. And I think that's where we've been pushing for an approach that looks at tools that already exist in governments that ensure some of these let's say in procurement, for example, that sort of procurement guidelines. How can we ensure that we have standards in place that consider AI procurement without having to sort of reconstruct or develop a whole standards hub or ecosystem? So I'm mindful that that may be long-winded, but I think the short of it is that, you know, it takes a while to develop that hub and that collaborative approach to standards. But on the other side, and in places where that can be done immediately or quickly, we're looking to embed standards into existing frameworks so that they can be considered in tandem with everything else that's going on. Over to you, Ever, if you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, and in addition to that, maybe what I see here in the Netherlands is that there's a lot of guidance, let me put it that way, regarding model risk management, right? So these models carry certain, so AI rules or AI systems are often called models, and these models carry risk of bias or of wrong decisions or whatnot. And what we see is there's a lot of guidance, and there is legislation being developed that addresses basically what should you have in place for governance as a company or as an entity to mitigate the risks of these models, or to be sure that you're aware of them. And what we do see is that the mere fact that people are thinking about this governance, that people are implementing a number of organizations are implementing proper AI governance, that we get a lot of discussions around, you know, who makes the decisions, who is responsible for what, who has the final say whether certain checks are sufficient, and I think that is. It's not entirely grassroots, I don't think, but I think that's a workable way forward, at least for let's say the larger organizations. Of course, it's very difficult for really small organizations that may still want to use AI in their business.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I agree with that. This is all around trust and trusting businesses as well, because there isn't, I don't think, going to be any golden or silver bullet that will deliver the explainability, repeatability of decisions. So there has to be a degree of trust. Do you think the public have trust in AI at the moment? Now, an example might be, does it really matter how accurate an app recommendation is on my smartphone compared with whether I'm assessed suitable for a mortgage? So there's a sliding scale of needing to know. So one is, do the public trust this, and what can we do to improve it? And secondly, if it is the answer to improve it is this improvement in governance, should the public be able to find out what data is held by particularly large organizations, and not only the way the data is held, but perhaps the way that data is perceived by that company?
Thanks for that. Should I go ahead? Okay. Thanks for that question. I think I mentioned earlier that we conducted a survey on public trust and technology last year at the Institute, and can make this available to attendees of UK IGF through the resources or when that's available. But we found some very interesting findings around trust in AI in particular. And as you rightly said, a lot of the in terms of acceptance rates of AI use, it sort of is determined across the specific use cases. We found that in the UK in particular, there was lower acceptance of AI for determining, let's say, jail sentences and welfare payments than AI used for medical diagnosis. So there is a sense, or there is some clarity around the fact that the use case sort of determines how comfortable people feel with the technology. But overall, trust in AI is low. And we see in examples from the UK, including the grading issue last year, and across the world. In the US, there was a recent issue whereby the government wanted to use a facial recognition system in tandem with its tax portal, and folks sort of raised arm against that they didn't want that application to be used. So around the world, we see that, citizens or the public are generally vocal about what use cases they're comfortable with and which they're not. But a lot of it stems from, I think, the ways in which the technology is being introduced, especially where it's in the public sector. Most of the time, we don't see adequate sort of consent or information or sort of knowledge being given about that technology before it is launched. So a lot of people are really sort of just brought into it when the application is being launched, as opposed to in the ideation phase or in the process of that technology being launched. So we think a huge part of this is really perhaps not a tech solution, but in the ways in which the technology itself is being introduced and in the ways in which it's being articulated. A lot of times its benefits are not well articulated to users prior to being launched or introduced in the public. And there's no meaningful interaction for people to participate in its design. So in terms of the ways in which governments, and that's where we sit, specifically working with governments and thinking about this, in terms of the ways in which governments can sort of improve public trust in some of these applications, it's really a matter of them taking onus in introducing it in sort of a really compelling way that drives or brings in public trust, but in sort of taking accountability as well when things don't go well. And some of the failures that we've seen sort of compound and disintegrate and trust. So how do governments then either react or respond to some of these public failures of AI adoption? It's really crucial in making sure that we don't embed that sentiment going forward. So in taking responsibilities for some of these procedures and seeking to address them in meaningful ways with the public, I think is very important as well.
Yeah, can I just...
Of course.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to ask Bridget, in your in the surveys that you've done, do you see any this response of, oh my God, no, not AI? So I've come across this in a couple of instances here, but is that something that you recognize?
Sort of not AI entirely is that what you're asking? If we see,
but yeah, that's a response that I've come across. Let me put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the ways in which our surveys have been designed have sort of taken as a premise that people understand that AI is being used in some capacity. So we tend to ask not, if they're entirely for or against AI, but in the specific use cases in which they're comfortable with. But anecdotally, we've certainly sort of heard people say that, that they aren't interested in using AI technologies at all, or for certain applications entirely.
Yeah. So in the Netherlands, actually the government fell last year over, but it wasn't AI, but over an automated decision system for fraud detection. And I think that, so your question of trust, in the Netherlands, at least, maybe not relevant for this particular venue, but in the Netherlands, at least, it's at a low. And I've had discussions with stakeholders in where the reaction definitely was, well, anything but not AI to, and this was in fraud assessment type or fraud indicator type of applications. until you manage to explain, well, what AI actually is and what the difference is between AI and well, any other automation process. So I think that there is a task to educate there as well, to be sure that people understand the risks, but also the benefits of applying these kinds of techniques.
But in practical terms, how do we go about doing that? So you mentioned, Everett, this idea of governance and improving governance in organisations, and the ability to potentially publicly, challenge them to find out what's held about me or you or Bridget, and to make it easy to do that, because there is a huge amount of data held out there that we may never know was collected. Historic data that may be potentially presenting us in a way we wouldn't wish to now be presented or understood. So in practical terms, is it up to governments to say every company over a certain size has a data compliance officer, public facing, who will find that data and make it, and then have that discussion, as you said, Bridget, with the public, with the wider society, that actually this is a two-way transfer of thoughts and ideas to try and improve that overall level of trust? Either.
Yeah, I'm just so in the EU, of course, we have GDPR, which in principle requires this, right? So it requires I should be able to ask what data any company has about me. I should be able to amend any errors in that data. I should be able to ask them to remove that data, unless, of course, they have proper cause to maintain that data. I think some kind of legislation along those lines is I see that as the only way that you could do this. I'm not saying that GDPR is a beautiful thing of its own, but some of those goals need to be cemented in law, I think.
I think I heard two questions in that. The first, if I'm not mistaken, was you asked how we go about educating the public on sort of or ensuring the public becomes more AI literate. And this is, I think, an opportunity for governments around the world in terms of their contribution to the AI ecosystem. And there are a number of strategic areas we've seen countries are sort of approaching this from in terms of research, education, and outreach. We've seen this within the K-12 education system. In some countries, there's now an integration of tech, or at least STEM, directly into the curriculum to ensure that people or young people are coming out of the educational system more knowledgeable about AI and tech more broadly. We see some effort being done, I think, in the business side in terms of workforce training and ensuring that the workforce is also AI literate. And there are a number of initiatives around diversity and inclusion as well in AI that I think cuts across, and some initiatives we've actually seen in the UK around visas, kind of extending visa programs to allow more people into the country who have these technical skills and to kind of broaden the space beyond what's currently in this ecosystem. So that would be sort of our approach in terms of thinking about how you raise a more AI literate citizenry. But the other side of it, I think, was the question around how to ensure that that businesses or companies are being held accountable for the data that they do collect, and to ensure that they share this information or are transparent with this information for citizens. And it reminds me of, I think, something we see in the Q&A here, where someone is asking about data brokers, and specifically their role in this. And data brokers in particular, I think, are an interesting stakeholder in this discussion, because they sort of fall outside of they're this intermediary that can fall outside of this the space of accountability, and most of the time they fall outside of the regulatory space. So I think the first thing is but they hold a lot of power in the data ecosystem. So I think the first step in this would probably to bring in some of these intermediaries, including data brokers, into the regulatory space. And then by bringing them in that space, you can hold them more accountable through some of Dr. Everett's suggestions in terms of regulation and accountability.
Thank you very much. Can I welcome Dr. Ruman Chowdhury? Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're going to go to questions and answers in a moment. But before I do that, can I give each of you 1 minute in case there isn't anything that you haven't been able to say that you thought you would want to say today, without a question, just a 1 minute statement from each of you. And we'll start with Bridget, if I may.
Sure. I think from our end, I may have articulated this, but the top priority for us is ensuring that governments around the world don't miss out on the opportunities of the tech revolution, and in particular what AI, not the hype, but what the technology allows us to do for citizens in terms of access and opening up the space, more personalized services, etc. But we are adamant about governments adopting it responsibly, and we think there's a strong case to be made there in terms of the economic and social impact of responsible and transparent adoption. And that's what we seek to take to the governments that we work with. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Everett, is there something that you had thought would come up that hasn't, that you can share with us in a minute?
Well, maybe I did mention, I think at the beginning, this need for management to be aware of these decisions, and or to be aware of the use of AI and to take responsibility for that. And I do still think that is, not in this particular discussion, but in general, that is a topic that is very often overlooked. So I'll take this opportunity to stress that again, that somebody has to take with open eyes the decision whether to automate certain processes, to collect certain data, and you can't leave that to whoever is implementing a system and then has to make that decision in the spur of the moment. There has to be a well-considered decision at management level.
Great, thank you. And Ruman, perhaps 1 minute from you on what you would have liked to have said, the key issue for you, and then we'll go to Q&A.
Absolutely.
Sorry, we can't hear you if you can hear us. Have you just gone on mute? Okay, obviously I don't know, sadly, why we can't hear you, which is a shame. So what I'll do is, while you have a look to see if there's, can you hear, you can hear us? Yeah. Well, perhaps try again. 1 minute. We heard you fine to start with. No. Okay. All right. Well, I don't know the reason for that, but what we'll do now is take some questions, and I think we're going to take a mix of questions from the room and questions that have been submitted online. And Isabel's going to help me. Where do we start?
Well, why don't we start with some questions in the room, and then what we'll do is we'll alternate one in the room one online, anything that's come up in the Q&A, and Stephen, it'd be fantastic if you can then act as a respondent to many of the questions as well and share your experience in this area too. So are there any first impressions, reactions, questions or comments from the room? Please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hi, thank you for the discussion. I'm Azan Khan. I'm a youth ambassador at the Internet Society. And I believe in the discussion, one of the things that was mentioned was the GDPR. And I thought it would be fit to point out that in Article 22, there is already a provision that deals with automated decision making, which I should also note the Conservative government has slightly watered down, to say the least, given that the safeguards that were there to make sure that explicit consent or a contractual basis was required has been removed. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask everyone, because we've focused on transparency, is that we've already seen a transparency requirement being imposed by the GDPR when it comes to use and decision making through AI. But what about the actual development of AI algorithms? And how do we ensure that the development and research that is currently taking place is taking place in an ethical way, given that effectively what is happening is a democratization of the algorithms that could be used, for example, to construct deepfakes and so on. Any Tom, Dick, and Harry with a VPS and knowledge of Python could potentially just create this sort of service, and it moves beyond the remit of just organizations to individuals and research as well. So I guess that's sort of like a two-part question for the entire panel. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you all hear me? Sorry.
Yes, we can. That's great. Did you hear the question? Oh no. Oh, you've gone again. We're going to get you in little tiny. It does say your microphone does look muted now. So try again. No. Okay. So, right. Where to start with the question? Part of that was about GDPR and about which does, and I'm of course perfectly aware of GDPR, but I wonder how many members of the general public are. Well, that was my wider point in the discussion, is about enabling them to use GDPR to find out what data is held and how it's used. And that's completely right and proper, but that's about this wider discussion about the education around data and the power that it holds. And then the second was about I think the development of AI and understanding how that AI has been developed and against what standards. And I think we touched upon some of that. And that's why I think we do need standards about not only the development, but the standards of how data standards, and someone who decides how you can loop back to check that the data you're using is relevant to the cohort you're going to be using your AI on, and that it doesn't have embedded bias within it. So that's something I'm very keen on. And of course, more enlightened companies having developed ethics committees who do that within the organization to try and make sure that what they are developing is what they want it to be and that it's appropriately developed. But I'm sure that Bridget and Everett have views on that as well. Who would like to go first?
Perhaps I can comment on the second part of the question, which is around the development of algorithms in particular, and especially the broadening of the space beyond just companies to individuals, and how do you hold people accountable? And I think the point you've just made about I'm sorry, Colin, about sort of data assessment is so critical. Being a practicing data scientist as well, so much of what you can develop is dependent on the data that you use, and I think that's why it's crucial to continue to assess the quality of data that are available publicly. There's so much data available through APIs, through a lot of platforms. How do we ensure that that data is sort of meets the necessary requirements and standards. And I think that's up to the ecosystem, whether in academia, boot camps, et cetera, to make that a requirement, that folks who are using these data for research and things of that nature, that the data quality meets a certain standard before they can be integrated into models that are used in some of these tools. But I think broadly, the onus is also on the institutions and sort of the governments who end up using these data tools that are developed either by companies or by individuals to put in the right frameworks and assessments to really understand what these models entail and what the data being used entails before they are sort of fully brought in and adapted into their ecosystem. So one of the things we've seen is the use of impact assessments. And we're seeing a lot of conversation around this in both the private and the public sector. And there's been some activity around this, sort of legislating this in the US. Before you can integrate a model into some of the existing processes, ensuring that it meets certain requirements on both the data and model side. I think it's a very good idea in terms of holding people accountable and in terms of making sure that we don't put anything out that it's not up to par or that is unethical.
Thank you. Everett?
Yeah, to add to that, I agree with so I agree with that, but I think the question was also about the commoditization of AI and the ensuring that unethical applications, as it were, are not developed. And there is, of course, in the EU Act on AI prohibits certain applications of AI. There are other initiatives, for instance, there are initiatives to prohibit, or calls, I should say, because it's not very far, not very advanced yet, to prohibit autonomous weaponry, for instance. Those are those are applications that you could consider too risky or too high impact for AI to be used. So there is some legislation is there, and of course, as you say, the commoditization makes it really difficult to prevent everybody from doing that, because it's like you say, if you know a little bit of Python, it's very easy to make a machine that automatically tracks somebody who walks by, and if you can make videos of anybody on the street, track them. You can make have face recognition of your neighbors. It's all very, very easy to do. It's not allowed, but in the end, it's also about the ethics of the use or the persons who are developing this stuff. And I think legislation goes only so far into in making sure that people actually adhere to that. And again, I think education can play an important role there. Education also of these ethical issues and the impact that you may have with certain applications.
Absolutely, and I think it's worth remembering that AI or not, there are people who want to do things that they shouldn't do, and so we're not all perfect. AI will make mistakes. We will make mistakes. It's one of those things, right? I think we're going to take a question from online now.
No problem.
Ellis.
Hello. I've got one from George Gisa. Question: do you think the Blue Horizons promises and pipe dreams of Brexit will result in a huge pipe of all UK consumers' data being siphoned into other jurisdictions, all because of so miscalled Brexit opportunities? I've got two more questions, but whenever you're ready.
Are you expecting me to answer that one, folks?
Open to the panel.
Open to the panel. There you go. Someone else start this time.
Well, not living in the UK, I don't feel I'm in a position to respond to this.
No. I mean, Bridget, I don't suppose you
I was going to say,
No.
sadly, I don't have the context either, so we'll turn it over to you.
No, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, the question starts with a so-called Brexit opportunity, so it's obviously got its own spin on it before we even start. I am not sure that I am qualified to comment on whether all this data is going to be sucked out into different jurisdictions. What I would say is that, and I say this about all areas of science, global endeavor. It is best done together by sharing rather than ring fencing. And so I would hope that once we have settled some of our ongoing issues, that we will continue to work very closely with our European and global partners and share data where appropriate to ensure that we are developing AI algorithms, machine learning for the benefit of not only citizens here in the UK, but globally as well.
If we have time, maybe we could do one more question and ask panelists to maybe summarize a key takeaway from the day. Would that be all right, Stephen?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Or from the day, from the session.
Great. And just George says, thank you very much for your answer. Jen Pearson from Defend Digital Me. The forthcoming EU AI Act will ban some high-risk applications and put safeguards around others. This won't be applied in the UK domestic law. There is an opportunity in the UK Data Protection and Digital Information Act to legislate. What do speakers think the top 3 priorities should be for protecting people from applications of AI?
So, top 3 areas to protect people from AI. I think that was the bottom line. Yep. Top 3 things that we should do.
Well, I think if I may kick this off, I think that there are that is. What I like the idea of certain applications being high-risk applications being regulated or even forbidden. So I think, regardless of what these exactly are, and you need to revisit those, of course, regularly, which I think is also part of the proposed EU Act. But I think that's one start. I think. A second point that I would want or a second regulation. So I already mentioned, of course, that it should be clear who is responsible for deciding on certain things. So I think that some kind of legislation or regulation that makes that mandatory is probably a second thing that I would want to add. And maybe thirdly, I think it is crucial that organizations are transparent about their use of AI. And this, so for instance, in GDPR, this is mandatory already, but are transparent about where they use, and not specifically, not only AI, but which decisions are automated, which data is collected, and what users can do to, or subjects of these decisions can do to address any apparent errors that were made.
Sure, I'll
Thank you, Bridget.
Yes, I'll add here that then I think Dr. Everest speaks very clearly on the business side. Perhaps I'll add some of what we're advocating on the government side. And having done some analysis on the UK national AI strategy, I think the top 3 we would set out would be to ensure that AI we minimize its harms and advance its benefits for everyone, is that the UK should continue to invest in the long-term needs of the AI ecosystem. And this requires not only developing a national AI ecosystem, but also looking at the areas in which it intersects with data. We know that there's an existing national data strategy, but in order for all of the components to work symbiotically, it requires financial commitments in terms of ensuring that the data strategy, the goals of the data strategy are aligned with the goals of the national AI strategy, to allow the country to develop the quality open data ecosystem that it desires for AI research and procurement and the like. I think the second would be that ensuring AI benefits all sectors and regions. What we've seen across the world is not just particular to the UK, is governments sort of say they want AI to benefit everyone. But unfortunately, a lot of the financial commitment ends up going towards defense AI strategy as opposed to, you know, some of the other sectors or regions within sort of a national economic system. So ensuring that the resources are shared equitably and are also distributed across various parts of the country would allow AI to have more of that diversity that hopefully helps to drive inclusion in the models and in the data sets that we care about. And then finally, we've talked about this quite a bit, but governance is such a key component, and we don't think it should be decoupled from the national strategy. The UK mentioned within its national strategy that it would have a forthcoming publication on regulating AI, and there was a paper that was set out sometime this year on a proposal for what that paper on regulating AI should look like. But we think there's space for both to be integrated so that the strategy is not purely economic and sort of decoupled from what the regulation looks like, and the two work hand in hand to ensure responsible adoption that drives inclusion and the benefits of the technology for everyone.
Thank you. And I think my three would be to promote and have a national conversation about what AI is and it isn't, to try and start that building of trust. Second would be to help people understand how their data is collected and how it's used, and put an emphasis on businesses to promote the fact that they hold data rather than wait to be asked for it. And the third one is where critical decisions are being made, to embed some sort of challenge, the ability to challenge. And if the AI can't explain why it came to the decision, then there should be a human included in that loop to circle back and be able to at least explain to someone. If the AI can't do it, then a human should be able to do it. And I think that's run out of time, have we? Or
I think that we are slightly over time, so I'd like everyone to thank our wonderful panel in person and also joining virtually.